Galactic law gave an alien widow 3 days to marry. She begged a human. Marry me, I'll warm your bed. The coolant pipe burst again. Steam hissed from the ceiling like a dying beast, hot enough to sting skin and thick enough to blur Finn's vision. He cursed under his breath and jammed his wrench into the pressure cap, torquing until his wrist protested. Another day, another patch job, another promise from station management that he'd never see paid. The tiny maintenance bay shuddered as a tram rumbled overhead. A fine rain of rust flakes fell from the ductwork and settled onto his shoulders like ash. He shook them off without looking up. No one came this deep into EOS 9's underbelly unless something was broken, or someone was desperate. His hand slipped. Hot spray hit his forearm. He yanked it back with a grunt, watching a red welt rise. Perfect, he muttered, grabbing the cleaner spray. It sputtered, nearly empty, like everything else on this forgotten moon, orbiting nothing that mattered. He sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow. The lamp above him flickered. He glanced up at it, then past it, toward the narrow sliding door. It remained sealed. Good. He needed a moment. Just one. To breathe. To stop thinking about the past. About Earth. About the things he'd left behind. Instead, Finn reached for a ration bar and bit off a chunk. It tasted like plastic regret. He chewed anyway. Then the door hissed open. He didn't look up at first. Too many scavengers, debt collectors, or half-drunk station drifters came stumbling in looking for parts, or someone to yell at. But this time, the air changed. The temperature dropped. Not cold exactly, but charged, sharp, like a sudden storm on the horizon. Finn stood slowly, his wrench still in hand. She stepped through the doorway like a queen into a war zone. Her skin was the color of new moss, smooth and glowing faintly beneath the flickering lights. Long snow-white hair spilled over her shoulders in a single pristine braid. She wore high-shouldered armor that looked ceremonial, but moved like it was ready for combat. Every step she took echoed against the metal floor, too precise for this place, too clean. He stared. She didn't blink. "Are you Finn Rilo, human mechanic of EOS 9?" she asked. Her voice was low, melodic, and under it, tightly wound steel. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I'm Finn. Who's asking?" "I am Nysera Valquin, of the Valquin bloodline, House 8, Veridin Starclade. I seek a husband. You are eligible." He blinked once. The silence stretched. "Come again?" She stepped forward. "Marriage," she said simply, her voice echoing lightly in the room. "I have 71 hours remaining. If I fail to establish a legal bond before the deadline, all holdings of my house, lands, assets, birthrights will revert to the Dominion Registry. I will be stripped of title, property, and protection." Finn blinked hard. "Wait, you're serious?" Nysera's jaw tightened, just enough to crack the smooth surface of her composure. "If the deadline passes," she said, softer now, a tremor of something like shame beneath the formality, "I will not only lose my inheritance. Without a household claim, I will be forfeited. I would be state-bound by contract or sold into conscripted servitude under the Dalek Clause." Finn was silent. She was too, but not because she lacked more to say. Because saying it had already cost her more than she wanted to show. "I have reviewed 72 profiles," she continued finally. "Yours is least likely to draw political challenge. You have no allegiances, no family ties, no debts I cannot erase." Finn folded his arms. "Wow, real romantic." "I am not seeking romance. I am seeking a contract." She stepped closer. Her posture was perfect, but her hands were clenched just enough to make the gauntlets creak. "I offer you legal protection, diplomatic exemption from local laws, and full access to House Valquin credits, shelter, status. I would also offer warmth, if that is your custom." He was still staring. "I sleep under a broken heat coil," he said. "On a cot." With springs, Nysera didn't respond. He took a breath. Thought of the bruises on his ribs from his last fall through a rusted hatch. Thought of that unopened message, of the bottle of synthrum he'd been saving, of waking up every morning, wondering if the oxygen scrubbers would give out. "You got a data pad with the contract?" She extended her hand, no hesitation. He took it. The screen shimmered with Veridin script, then translated to standard. It was real, official, stamped with 3 planetary seals and a clause referencing the Noble Widow Treaty, some obscure galactic holdover from a time when alliances were made in beds instead of battlefields. He scrolled, read enough to know it was airtight, and crazy. You ever think about why a galactic treaty would demand marriage within 3 days of widowhood? He asked quietly, still not looking up. Kind of sounds like control dressed up as custom. Nisera's silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, weighted with a lifetime of knowing exactly what she was doing and how little choice she had. Finn sighed, put the wrench down, looked her in the eye. Why me? Nisera looked at him for the first time, not past him, not through him, at him. I chose you, she said, her voice quieter now, because you are alone, like me. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint wheeze of the cooling fan. He could have said no, should have. Nothing about this was sane, but he hadn't been chosen in years. Not for anything that mattered. Finn pressed his thumb to the screen. The contract glowed green. The 6th chimed flatly from the wall. Marriage confirmed. Union logged and filed. Congratulations, Nisera let out a breath, almost inaudible. Her shoulders dropped a centimeter. That's it, he said, for now? I don't even get a kiss? Nisera arched one perfect brow. Do you require one? No, he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Just checking. She turned to leave, then paused. Prepare your living space. I will return at cycle's end with my belongings. You mean my storage closet? Nisera tilted her head. We will make it sufficient. Then she was gone. The door hissed shut behind her, sealing him into the quiet again. Finn looked around the room, his cot, his broken heater, his pile of salvaged tools, and realized something strange. It already felt less empty, and far more dangerous. Finn barely slept. Not that sleep came easy on most nights in a rusted pod with a failing gravity plate and a thermal coil that rattled like loose screws in a tin box. But this night, sleep had company. The datapad still rested on his chest, glowing faintly with the contract seal, mocking him with every pulse. He lay on his cot, boots still on, staring at the curved ceiling. Each breath felt too loud. Each shift of metal from outside, a reminder that his world had shifted without asking his permission. He was married, legally, permanently, at least by Dominion standards, to a woman who looked like carved emerald and spoke like she was carved from steel. A woman who hadn't blinked before offering him her hand and a home in the same breath. Who had said plainly that if this plan failed, she would be property. That word stuck with him more than the rest. He rubbed his eyes. His muscles ached from crouching all day. The coolant burn on his forearm throbbed where he'd forgotten to treat it. His heater kicked on and off in erratic bursts. He didn't have spare blankets. Not that it mattered. She'd said she was moving in. Said it like a soldier reclaiming territory. He rolled to his side, staring at the packed shelves that made up half his living space. Power cells, spare fuses, a broken radio from Sector 12. He could survive with what he had. Had been barely. But this wasn't survival anymore. It was accommodation, partnership, whatever that meant now. When the door chime buzzed precisely at the start of station cycle, Finn sat up too fast, smacked his knee against a crate, and bit back a curse. He limped toward the control pad and hesitated before opening the door. Nisera Valquin stood exactly as she had the day before, poised, composed, unreadable, but now flanked by 2 grav sleds bearing crates marked in a swirling noble dialect he couldn't read. Her armor was gone, replaced with a deep gray cloak that clung to her tall frame, the kind diplomats wore to funerals or declarations of war. Good morning, she said without looking tired at all. May I enter? He stepped aside. Yeah, come in. I guess this is your place too now. She glided past him like she didn't hear the edge in his voice, but her eyes flicked to the low ceiling, the exposed wiring, the single cot against the wall. I will require a horizontal surface for meditative alignment. Right. I've got the floor, he said, gesturing vaguely. It's mostly level. She said nothing, but her mouth pressed slightly tighter. He watched her take inventory of the space. She opened a crate with a touch, revealing folded fabric and slim metal cylinders shaped like candles, but humming with stored energy. No offense, he said, leaning against the bulkhead, but I figured you'd be used to better accommodations. You know, thrones, velvet, guards with laser halberds. I have slept on stone before, she replied. At least here the air is warm. He raised a brow. That's not warm. That's broken insulation. I haven't been able to regulate the thermal loop in weeks. She crossed to the console, studied the readouts for all of 3 seconds, and keyed in a sequence so fluidly it made Finn blink. A low hum filled the pod as the heater surged to life. Even the flickering light steadied. You rerouted the main draw from the bypass circuit, he said, impressed despite himself. I grew up on a ship, she said simply. Repairs were not beneath me. He nodded, filing that away. That tiny sliver of shared reality, knowing how to keep failing tech running, landed deeper than it should have. She moved to one of the grav sleds and pulled free a sealed nutrient pack. Green, gelatinous, and slightly glowing, she tore a corner and drank like it was routine. Finn opened his own cabinet, grabbed a dented can of synth protein, and popped the tab. He took a bite, chewed. So, he said, how exactly does this work now? This arrangement will require coordination, she said, sipping again. We will need to align schedules for the upcoming audit. Questions will be asked. About us. Yes. Finn scratched his head. And what are we supposed to say? That we fell madly in love over a clogged coolant pipe? She looked at him. Not coldly, but long enough for his grin to fade. You are not required to pretend to love me, she said, only to convince others that I matter to you. Something about the way she said it, like it cost her, made him set his food down. I'm not good at pretending, he said quietly. Nacera turned to a crate and lifted out a set of rolled bedding, silver-threaded and marked with her house seal. Then don't pretend, she said without looking up. Just be convincing. They worked in silence after that, her unpacking, him shifting tools out of the way. Every movement made the small space feel smaller. Twice they bumped shoulders. She didn't flinch, but she didn't meet his eyes either. When she unrolled her sleeping mat beside his cot, Finn hesitated. That's pretty close. Spatial constraints, she replied. He nodded slowly. Right. She sat, cross-legged, facing the door. Her hands rested on her knees. Her breathing slowed. Her back straightened. Meditation, she'd called it. Finn didn't sit. He moved to his console, checked the water recycler stats, pretended to read the latest system diagnostics. But he kept looking over. At her posture, at the little strand of hair that had slipped from her braid, at the way her jaw remained tight, even in stillness. She wasn't relaxed. She was bracing. When he finally lay down on his cot and let his eyes drift shut, he said one thing, before the hum of the heater lulled him halfway toward sleep. You don't have to convince me. There was no answer. But the silence that followed wasn't cold. It was listening. And for now, that was enough. The warmth was the first thing Finn noticed when he woke. Dry even, and steady. So unlike the usual wheeze of recycled heat that belched in fits from the dying coil behind the wall. For a long, still moment, he simply lay there, listening. No alarms, no leaking pipes, just silence, humming and whole. He turned his head. Nacera was already up, seated cross-legged on the floor with her back to him. She was perfectly still, hands resting gently on her knees, spine aligned with quiet discipline. Her white braid cascaded down one shoulder like poured ice. She didn't move, not even as he sat up and groaned softly from the stiffness in his back. Finn rubbed his eyes, then his neck. The cot springs had bitten into his shoulder all night. His throat was dry. The little pod hadn't felt this warm in weeks, maybe months. He glanced toward her again. She must have rebalanced the circuits while he slept, fixed something without being asked, without even mentioning it. He stood slowly, grabbing a can of water from the shelf. It hissed open with a click. As he drank, he watched the steam from her breath barely waver in the heated air. Not even a flicker. You grind your teeth when you sleep, Nacera said calmly without turning. Finn blinked. Yeah? Well, you breathe like a meditation drone. A pause. Not quite a smile, but something softened around her mouth. He popped a ration bar from its foil and chewed while checking the system console. The heater coil was running at 78% efficiency, miraculous considering it hadn't passed 50% in years. The cabin temperature was stable, power draw within tolerances, no blinking warnings, no critical malfunctions. Thanks for fixing the heat, he said after a moment. It wasn't functioning at optimum, she replied. Still, thanks. Another pause, comfortable this time. Nacera stood fluidly, her cloak shifting as she moved toward the screen. She keyed in a sequence and projected a file. A notification arrived while you slept, she said. Preliminary verification has begun. Finn took another bite of the bar. That's fast. 2 cycles, then we meet the liaison. He glanced at the file. Dominion seal. Red priority. It didn't just look official, it looked final. There's suspicion, she said. Frontier marriages are often fraudulent. Our timing raises flags. Finn grunted. What gave us away? The luxury pod, the gourmet meals? They will interrogate our bond, she continued, unbothered. Biometric markers, eye tracking, neural stress indicators. They won't only listen, they'll observe every word, every pause, every breath. He ran a hand through his hair. Let me guess. Fail the test, you lose everything. And you, she said, become disposable. Deportation, detention, or reassignment. He stared at the message for a moment longer, then closed the file. So what now, he asked. We rehearse? There's a scan chamber below subdeck 3. Minimal traffic, biometric calibration, and behavioral syncing can be simulated. Finn raised a brow. You mean fake a marriage in a storage closet? Nisera's gaze didn't flicker. I mean, learn to occupy space together without tension. Learn each other's patterns. You mean learn to stand close? Yes. He grabbed his jacket and followed her into the corridor. It was still early. Most of the station remained in sleep cycle. Pipes hissed softly above. A faint tang of ozone clung to the walls. Somewhere down the hall, a generator coughed and whined before dying into silence. They walked side by side, not speaking, not needing to, something about the quiet fit. The lift squealed as it descended. Dust floated through the shaft, catching on the weak station lights. Finn glanced sideways at her. Nisera's face was calm, composed, but her hands were rigid at her sides. When they reached the chamber, she keyed in her code. The doors parted. It was bare inside. Padded floor, thin lights. Biometric sensors arranged in arcs along the ceiling. It smelled faintly of old copper and static. She stepped in first. This chamber was used for diplomatic simulations, she said. Training envoys, conflict de-escalation. Fitting, Finn murmured. This is starting to feel like a hostage negotiation. Nisera faced him. We begin. He blinked. Just like that? Yes. She took a step forward. So did he. She raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, and laid it against his chest. His heart reacted before his brain did, leaping in his chest with enough force he knew she felt it. Nisera's eyes remained on his. She didn't flinch, but her fingers, so sure a moment ago, tensed slightly where they touched him. You're nervous, she said. You're not? No. He tilted his head. Liar. A flicker passed through her eyes. Not anger, not resistance, something closer to guilt. Breathe, she said quietly. He did. Deep, slow. The sensors around them pulsed faintly, registering the shift. She stepped even closer. Her scent was faint, not perfumed, clean, like ozone after rain, sharp and quiet. Her hand still rested over his heart. He placed his hand over hers. She didn't move, didn't withdraw. For a moment there was no sound in the chamber at all, just heat, connection, and the impossible stillness of two people pretending not to be real. The console behind them chimed. Scan complete. Nisera stepped back. Too fast. Her face was calm again, but her hands were tucked behind her back now, hidden. You passed, she said flatly. He stared at her. Did I? She didn't answer. He followed her out into the corridor. Neither of them spoke as they walked. The lift ride back was longer somehow. The silence between them different. Not strained, just heavy. When they reached the pod, Finn paused at the door before opening it. You know this gets harder, right? He said. Nisera glanced at him. This isn't the test, he added. That was just breathing. She nodded once. I know. They stepped inside. The warmth still lingered, but nothing felt the same. The pod was quiet that evening, but not with the kind of silence that weighed heavily on the air. This silence moved, shifted, hummed with something tentative, like a conversation waiting to be had but not yet spoken aloud. Nisera sat at the small fold-out table, scanning a report on the audit schedule, her fingers gliding over the surface of the datapad with silent precision. Across from her, Finn tinkered with the wiring panel near the floor, half focused, half listening, the way someone does when they're waiting for the right moment to speak but unsure what that moment looks like. The verification scan had passed technically, but what lingered wasn't relief. It was a ripple of something neither of them wanted to define yet. Nisera looked up first. You rarely sleep deeply, she said, tone neutral. Finn smirked. This pod's not exactly luxury class. You get used to sleeping light when every noise might be a pipe ready to burst or a rat chewing through the coolant lines. She considered that for a moment, then nodded. Practical. He shifted, wiped his hands on a rag. Is that how people see you? What? Practical, controlled, efficient. I imagine so. But not warm. She paused. No. He leaned back against the wall, resting his arm on his bent knee. Did you used to be? Nicera didn't answer right away. She set the datapad down, carefully, like it held something fragile. I wasn't raised to be warm. I was raised to be necessary. Finn watched her, quiet now. My parents were diplomats. My union with Kaler was arranged before my second growth cycle. We were matched for lineage, not compatibility. Duty, not desire. Her fingers traced a faint scar along her left wrist, half hidden beneath a cuff. But he was kind, distant, but not cruel. Finn nodded slowly. Still, no choice in it. No, and now no choice again. But this time you picked me. Yes. She looked at him directly. Because you weren't expected. Because no one would think you mattered enough to be part of something important. He didn't flinch at that. It wasn't an insult, it was honesty, maybe even respect. And before this? She asked. Before you came to EOS 9? Finn exhaled, rolled his shoulders like he was loosening a knot. I grew up in the mid-belts. Worked construction when I was 15, orbital repairs, welding mostly. I used to think it'd lead somewhere. Certification, maybe a real license. Didn't happen. Then I hopped systems, kept fixing things, never stayed long. Got tired of being someone temporary. Nicera's gaze didn't waver. I came here because this station didn't ask questions. Didn't care who I'd been, only what I could fix. And do you want to leave? He laughed, dry and soft. Leave for where? There's nothing out there waiting for me. I'm not part of anyone's plan. She looked at him, as though she were memorizing him. Then perhaps we are not so different. There was a quiet between them, and this one wasn't empty. It was full, shared. Nicera stood and moved toward the tiny cooking unit. She retrieved 2 nutrient packs, hers, glowing green as always, his, the usual dull gray. She handed one to him without a word, sat back down and waited. He took a bite, chewed, then paused. This is better than the last batch. I recalibrated the heating element, she said. Your rations were scalding the protein core. It compromised the taste. You messed with my food. I optimized your food. He grinned, and this time it reached his eyes. Thanks. She inclined her head barely, but it meant something now. Later, as they prepared for rest, Finn caught her adjusting her sleeping mat a few centimeters closer to his cot. She said nothing about it. Neither did he. He lay down, not quite ready for sleep. You know, he said into the low light, it's strange. What is? That I don't feel like a guest here anymore. Nicera's voice was soft. You are not. They both lay still, facing the same direction, the hum of the heater steady now, the pod unusually quiet. It wasn't love, but it was no longer just survival either. And that felt like something worth holding on to. The lights in the pod were low, set to the soft amber hue Nicera had calibrated earlier to match Veridan twilight. Finn hadn't minded. It warmed the metallic edges of the room, made the shadows feel less like cracks in a dying station and more like folds in something private. Something lived in. He sat on the edge of the cot, watching her prepare with the quiet efficiency of someone used to performance. Not deception, presentation. Her every movement was purposeful, adjusting the lay of her collar, brushing invisible dust from her sleeves, pulling her hair back just enough to show the glint of her house crest at her temple. Stand here, she said, gesturing to a spot 2 feet in front of her, near the center of the pod. If the liaison enters, their gaze will sweep left first. I will greet them. You should already be beside me, close. Finn stepped forward, then hesitated. How close? She looked at him. The intensity of her gaze had become familiar, but not softer, just known, calculated. She didn't flinch when she spoke. Touching as expected. His brow lifted slightly, but he moved without comment. He positioned himself beside her, shoulder to shoulder. She turned to face him directly. Closer, she said. He stepped in, close enough to feel the soft press of her hip against his leg. Close enough to notice that she wasn't breathing evenly. Her arms stayed at her sides, but her fingers flexed once before stilling. She tilted her chin up, watching his eyes. The audit system measures posture tension. It tracks dilation, pupil rhythm, skin temperature. If you appear hesitant, if we seem unnatural, they'll know. He swallowed, nodded once. Okay, let's make it natural then. He reached out slowly, giving her the chance to stop him if she wanted to. She didn't. His hand came to rest on her waist, not possessive, just steady. Her breath caught almost imperceptibly. "That's not enough," she said softly, eyes still locked on his. "What else do they expect?" he asked, his voice low. She lifted her hand hesitantly and laid it over his heart again. The same place she had during the scan chamber trial. This time, though, her fingers lingered longer. They curled slightly against the fabric of his shirt. Then slowly, she moved in, just a fraction. Her forehead brushed lightly against his. Every motion was controlled, deliberate, but nothing about the heat in the space between them was procedural. "Hold that," she whispered. He did, and something changed. She leaned into him, not as a noble rehearsing an act, but as a woman testing a truth. The shift in her body wasn't calculated. It was quiet, hesitant, vulnerable. His hand slid a little further around her waist, fingers splaying across the curve of her back. He didn't pull her in, not exactly. She came to him. Her other hand came up, lightly resting at the side of his neck. Not formal, not for show. Her touch was warm. She tilted her head slightly, her breath brushing against his lips as she spoke. "When they arrive," she said, "we'll need to stay like this, settled, familiar, intimate, but not performative." "Right," he said, "not too much, just real." "Yes." He let his forehead lean against hers. Their breath mingled. The air in the pod thickened. The only sound was the steady pulse of the heater behind them and the soft, electric silence of anticipation. Then, his hand moved. Not fast, not urgent. It slipped up from her back to her shoulder, then to the side of her neck, where his thumb brushed the edge of her jaw. Her skin was cool there, like stone touched by the sun. She didn't move away. In fact, she closed her eyes. "This real enough?" he asked, voice rougher than he expected. Nicera opened her eyes. Slowly, then she kissed him. It wasn't a showpiece. It wasn't ceremonial. It didn't burn fast and reckless. It moved with precision, like everything she did, until it didn't. Until her fingers tightened slightly in his shirt. Until his arm curled around her lower back, pulling her gently but fully against him. Her body softened as it met his. Not collapsed, yielded, just for that moment. She tasted like something foreign, citrus and heat, something grown under a different sun. When they broke apart, she didn't step away immediately. Her forehead rested against his again, her breathing shallow but steady. "Again," she said. His eyebrows rose. "For the rehearsal," she added, voice barely audible. "Right," he murmured. "For the rehearsal." This kiss was slower. He cradled her jaw more gently. She leaned into him more completely. When her hand found his wrist and held it, firm but careful, Finn felt the static between them shift, warmth blooming, not just from desire, but from the careful mutual recognition of two people building something with no name yet. When it ended, they stood in silence again, bodies still touching, breath still uneven. Then Nicera stepped back, smoothed her clothing, and said simply, "That will suffice." Finn chuckled, breathless. "Yeah, I think we nailed the proximity issue." She gave him a glance that was almost dry amusement. Almost. He watched her cross the room, retrieve a cloth from the small cabinet, and dab at her lips with the formality of someone resetting after a ceremony. And yet when she turned, she didn't avoid his gaze. "Again tomorrow," she said. He nodded, still stunned, still smiling. "For the audit," she clarified. "Of course." But deep down, they both knew, whatever this was, it was already more than preparation. And tomorrow wasn't just rehearsal. It was another step towards something neither of them had planned for, but both of them had started to want. They didn't speak about the kiss, not the one they shared in the name of preparation, or the second one that lingered like a spark under the skin. No words passed between them afterward that addressed what it meant, and yet everything between them had shifted. It hung in the way their hands brushed when they passed tools, in how their eyes lingered half a second longer than they had before, in the stillness that had stopped being uncomfortable. Now, the verification liaison was on approach. Finn stood in front of the mirror panel, adjusting the collar of his shirt. A rare, clean one pulled from deep storage, one Nicera had quietly ironed without comment. The thermal regulation setting on the pod was holding steady, as was his heart rate, though both seemed a little too high for comfort. Behind him, Nicera checked the sensor logs for inconsistencies. The station's gravity had flickered during the night, and the audit team would be scanning for signs of environmental stress that might alter biometric readings. She, of course, had prepared contingency logs. "You're fidgeting," she said without turning. "I'm human," he replied. "It's what we do when we're about to get grilled by bureaucrats. You should appear calm, at ease. I'll work on it." She finally turned to him. "Approach me." Finn did. It was easier now. Being close to her didn't feel like a breach of boundaries. It felt like gravity. She took his hand, not mechanically, not for demonstration, but to test it, to rehearse without calling it that. Her fingers slid between his, palm to palm. His skin was warm. Hers always felt just a few degrees cooler, smooth and unyielding at first, until it softened. "You'll greet them," she said quietly, "as my bonded partner, confidently, casually. Smile, but not excessively. They'll be looking for imbalance." "I don't smile excessively." "You do when you're nervous." Finn grinned on instinct. "Like that?" "Less." Her other hand came to rest at the side of his face. He didn't move. Her thumb brushed along his jaw, and it wasn't about posturing anymore. She was grounding him, steadying him, not because they were being watched, but because she wanted him to feel safe in his own body. Her gaze moved over his face, lingering. "You're ready." "Are you?" Nisera hesitated, just long enough for him to notice. Then she nodded. A chime sounded. They both looked toward the door. "They're early," Finn said. "No," she replied. "They're exact." Finn inhaled slowly, letting it fill his chest, then released it with care. He stepped back half a pace and let Nisera lead. Her presence shifted as she moved, still poised, still proud, but somehow softer at the edges. As if the act of stepping into this together changed the shape of her stance. The door hissed open. 2 figures entered. One was humanoid, lean and immaculately dressed in a brushed gray Dominion coat. His skin shimmered faintly, modified with subdermal tracers. The other was shorter, masked, a biosensory technician. Their gaze was unreadable, filtered through a lens designed to pick up micro-changes in temperature, voice frequency, stress responses. "Finn Raylo, Nisera Valquin," the liaison said. "I'm Auditor Vex Sarlin. We're here to conduct the formal review of your union." "Of course," Nisera said, stepping forward. "Please, come in." They did, their eyes moving immediately across the space, scanning every corner of the pod, every flicker of light, every data point passively feeding into their report. Finn offered a calm smile, just one, no teeth. The liaison's gaze settled on him. "You appear adjusted." "Comfortably married," Finn said, stepping beside Nisera. "New heater helps." The auditor didn't smile. "You'll both stand here." Nisera moved beside Finn, aligning herself with him. Her hand found his again, this time without instruction. The questions began. What food does she prefer? How do you spend your rest cycles? What tone does he use when he's tired? What makes her laugh? Finn answered, sometimes with words, sometimes with a glance at her that said more than data ever could. She spoke with clarity, with familiarity, her voice dipping only once, on a question about scent. "He smells like ion oil and citrus soap," she said, her lips barely curving. "And heat." The liaison recorded everything, but his expression never changed. Then came the last part. "Physical confirmation, please stand chest to chest, embrace." Naturally. Finn stepped forward first this time. Nisera followed. He wrapped his arms around her without hesitation, pulling her into his chest. Her arm slid around his waist. Her cheek came to rest just beneath his collarbone. They stayed like that, breathing together. He felt her exhale, not a performance, not timing, just a release. And he pressed a kiss into her temple, not for the audit, not for the points. For her. The auditor nodded once. "We have what we need." The team withdrew as efficiently as they arrived, without fanfare, without confirmation. The door hissed shut. Finn didn't step away. Neither did she. Eventually, she looked up at him, her eyes unreadable, but softer now, less guarded. "That was convincing," she said. He ran his thumb along the curve of her jaw again. "I wasn't trying to convince anyone," he said. "Just choosing you." She didn't respond right away, but she didn't let go. And for the first time since they signed that contract, the silence wasn't heavy with what was unspoken. It was filled with everything they finally understood. The audit results arrived 2 days later, sealed under the Dominion's high-priority encryption. The message came not with ceremony or confrontation, but as a soft blink on the pod's wall terminal. Small, unassuming, The kind of alert you might ignore if you didn't know what was writing on it. Nicera was the one who opened it. She read in silence. Her shoulders didn't tense. Her breath didn't hitch. But Finn saw the moment the words reached her, how her gaze paused, sharpened, and then gently unfurled. "It's done," she said. He straightened from where he'd been kneeling beside the heater, mid-repair. "Done. Meaning?" "The audit is passed, verified. Full status restoration confirmed." She looked at him. "The marriage is legally recognized. My estate is protected. And you?" Her voice didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. "I am no longer under threat of forfeiture." Finn leaned back, arms resting across his knees, and let the words settle. So that was it. No arrest, no deportation, no scanners digging through their every breath, no questions designed to unmake what they had carefully, awkwardly built. The Dominion had seen enough. They were free. But the strange thing, what surprised him most, was that he didn't feel relieved in the way he'd expected. There was no great exhale, no triumphant punch of adrenaline, just a quiet warmth, something steadier, something that felt like belonging. Nicera stepped closer. The datapad dimmed behind her. "You're quiet," she said. He looked up at her, offering the smallest smile. "Just thinking." "About what?" "That it feels different now. Not finished, just real." She tilted her head, folding her arms loosely across her chest. "You expected something dramatic?" "Maybe." He stood, brushing his hands on his pants. Fireworks. A booming voice declaring, "You may now remain married." Something ridiculous. She smiled. A real one this time. Subtle but unmistakable. "There's no ceremony for survival." "Doesn't mean we can't make one." Her brow lifted. "Are you proposing a ritual?" "I'm proposing we finally eat something that doesn't glow," he said. "I've got one last Earth meal bar. It's probably stale, but I figured a legally binding union deserves a slightly expired celebration." Nicera nodded solemnly. "Very well, a bonding feast." He pulled the wrapper from a storage crate like it was treasure, then split it in half, and offered her the first bite. She sniffed it once, delicately, then took it between her fingers and nibbled. Her eyes widened slightly. "This is sweet," she said, surprised. "Chocolate, artificial, but close enough." She nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "I approve." They ate in silence, but not the kind that filled voids. It was companionable, layered with everything that didn't need saying, yet. When they finished, Finn leaned against the edge of the cot. Nicera stood a few feet away, gazing through the narrow viewport. EOS 9 drifted silently above a cracked moon, lit by a sliver of its dying sun. Neon satellites flickered like distant lighthouses against the dark. "You're free now," he said. "You could leave. Go wherever you want." She didn't turn. "Yes." "Are you going to?" She looked back at him, eyes unreadable for a beat. Then she stepped forward, slow, measured, but there was no hesitation. "No," she said. "This is my place now. My name is safe, but here, I am seen." Finn smiled, a little crooked. "That heater's not going to fix itself." "I could recalibrate it again," she said, tone perfectly even. "Or," he said, reaching for her hand, "we let it stay a little too warm." She didn't pull away. Her fingers curled into his, fitting easily now. No rehearsal, no scan, no performance, just closeness, chosen. The silence returned, deep and easy. They stood like that as the pod lights dimmed to evening levels, the heater humming in its usual imperfect rhythm, and the stars beyond the viewport blinked steadily, quiet witnesses to a marriage that had started as strategy and ended in something far simpler and far more rare. Belonging. When Finn leaned down to kiss her again, there were no questions left between them, no tests, no laws, no distance, only need and permission. Nicera met his mouth with her own, no hesitation, no calculation. Her hands, once so disciplined, now slid up his chest, mapping the planes of him with reverence, as if memorizing the man she had chosen. The kiss deepened, unhurried but searing, their breaths twining between them, stoking something that had waited too long to be touched. Finn's hands found her hips, holding her like she might vanish if he loosened his grip. But she didn't shy away. She stepped into him, into all of him, with the surety of someone claiming her place. And then, without a word, Nicera pushed him gently back toward the cot. He let her guide him, heart hammering in his chest, every nerve ending awake, raw, aching for her. His legs hit the edge of the mattress, and he sat down heavily, looking up at her. This fierce, luminous woman who had crossed galaxies of duty and grief to stand here now, reaching for him not out of necessity, but out of want. Narration straddled him in one fluid motion, her knees bracketing his thighs, her body sinking into his with slow, deliberate weight. Her hands cupped his face, steady and possessive. Her breath was shallow, but her gaze never faltered. She looked at him like he was something rare, something precious, something earned. Finn's hand slid instinctively up her thighs, feeling the smooth, unbroken strength of her under the thin fabric of her clothes. She shivered under his touch, not from fear, but from pleasure, from anticipation. Her pupils were blown wide now, silver nearly swallowed by black, her expression torn open in a way he knew she would never show anyone else. He gripped her hips harder, grounding himself in the reality of her weight, her heat, her nearness. Narration rolled her hips against him slowly, drawing a low involuntary groan from his throat. She pressed herself closer, the friction deliberate, electric. Finn gasped softly at the sensation, his head falling back for a heartbeat. He had never felt anything like this. Not just the heat, not just the hunger, but the way she owned the moment, the way she moved against him with a kind of slow, devastating grace that shattered whatever walls he still had left. Narration leaned down, her lips brushing his ear, her voice nothing but a trembling whisper. "Let me." It wasn't a request. It was a vow. He surrendered to her without reservation, hands sliding up her back, tracing the elegant line of her spine beneath her clothes. His mouth found the base of her neck, tasting the faint salt of her skin, the living proof of her body against his. She tilted her head back, offering more, a quiet gasp escaping her lips as he kissed a trail along the delicate network of glowing veins at her throat. Her fingers tangled in his hair, guiding his mouth back to hers, and the kiss they shared now was messy, desperate, full of heat and unsaid promises. Narration shifted against him, finding a rhythm that made Finn's hands tighten, made his breath shudder from his lungs. She ground down against him slowly, letting herself feel it all. Every slow drag of fabric against fabric, every tremor she pulled from his body. Her own pleasure built alongside his. He could feel it in the way she clutched at him, in the soft, helpless sounds that broke from her lips, sounds she tried and failed to swallow. Finn's heart raced, but he didn't rush her. He matched her pace, meeting every roll of her hips with a slow thrust of his own, savoring the exquisite, unbearable closeness. Narration's head dropped to his shoulder, her breathing ragged now. He wrapped his arms around her, cradling her to him as if sheltering something sacred. She moaned low in her throat as she moved, small, raw sounds that spilled against his skin, each one driving him harder into the aching, molten place where want blurred into something deeper. She had never been like this with anyone. He knew it. He felt it. In the way she clung to him, not for show, but because she wanted him, chose him. The cot beneath them creaked, but neither cared. Finn cupped her jaw again, bringing her face up to his, needing to see her as she broke against him. Her eyes fluttered open. Silver fire met earthy brown, and in that moment, breathless, clinging to each other in the dim glow of the pod, there was nothing else. No station, no galaxy, no past, no future. Only the fierce, irrevocable truth of what they had made between them, the claiming of something that had always been meant to be. Narration's body tightened, her movement stuttering, and a low, shuddering cry broke from her as she collapsed against him, trembling. Finn followed her over the edge, buried in her, every muscle tensing as the world around them melted into white heat. When it passed, they stayed entangled, chests heaving, skin damp and clinging. Neither spoke. There was no need. Finn smoothed her hair back from her forehead with a hand that shook slightly, not from nerves now, but from the aftershock of feeling too much. Narration pressed her face into his neck, breathing him in, her body still trembling faintly with aftershocks she didn't bother to hide. He kissed her temple again, tender and sure. She made a small, satisfied sound, something between a hum and a sigh, and shifted to curl more tightly against him. No distance now, no pretense. Only them, raw, imperfect, chosen. A new beginning, born not from desperation or contracts, but from the simple, devastating power of two people finding home in each other's arms. Morning on Eos 9 didn't come with sunlight. It came with the soft hum of the station cycling into its artificial day mode, a subtle shift in the air filtration systems, the distant buzz of commerce waking up somewhere down the corridors. Inside the pod, though, time moved slower. Finn woke to warmth, real, steady warmth, Not from the half-broken heater humming weakly in the corner, but from the woman curled against him, her bare skin tucked against his, her breathing slow and even in the hollow of his throat. He didn't move at first. He just lay there, feeling the weight of her draped over him, one leg tangled lazily with his, her hand splayed over his heart like she'd claimed it sometime in the night and never let go. It felt right, more right than anything he'd known in a long time. Nisera shifted slightly, her forehead brushing against his chest. She made a soft, sleepy sound, then blinked up at him. Her silver eyes, usually so sharp and guarded, were hazy now, softened by sleep and something far rarer, contentment. Finn smiled, reaching up to brush a lock of her white hair away from her face. "Hey," he said, voice still rough from sleep. Nisera studied him for a moment, her gaze slow and deliberate. Then she slid her hand higher, curling her fingers around his shoulder, anchoring herself closer. "You are awake early," she murmured. "Didn't want to miss this," he said, his thumb tracing slow, lazy circles along her spine. She smiled, small, real, unpolished. A smile that would have been unthinkable when he first met her, proud and frozen and desperate. Now she was here. Warm, tangible, his. Nisera shifted, rising up slightly to straddle his hips again, but slower this time, with the easy grace of someone who knew she was wanted. She looked down at him, her hair falling in a soft curtain around them. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, certain. "From now on," she said, leaning closer so her lips brushed the shell of his ear, sending a shiver down his spine, "I will be the one to warm your bed." Finn's heart stuttered painfully, almost embarrassingly against her chest. He tipped his head back to look at her fully, wonder and hunger tangling together in his expression. "You sure you can handle that responsibility?" he teased, his hands sliding up her thighs. Nisera's smile deepened. "You have endured worse hardships." He laughed, a low, rough sound that made her pulse jump. "You have no idea," he said, and pulled her down into a kiss that tasted like morning, like survival, like belonging. Their bodies pressed close again, but there was no urgency this time. No desperate race toward release. Just slow, aching discovery. Hands mapping familiar territory with new reverence. Mouths finding each other with the laziness of people who finally had all the time they wanted. Nisera gasped softly against his lips as he rolled them gently, settling her beneath him. Her arms curled up around his neck, pulling him down until there was no space left at all. "I choose this," she whispered against his mouth. He kissed the words from her lips, savoring them, and in the quiet pulse of the pod's heartbeat, surrounded by the slow, messy thrum of life on a broken station orbiting a dying moon, Finn Raylo and Nisera Valquin built something unshakable out of warmth, out of want, out of the fierce, stubborn hope that maybe, just maybe, home wasn't a place at all. It was a person, and he had finally found his.